Burkina Faso says it just built Africa's largest rice factory. But in the West, that's barely a headline. And for decades, Africa was told to import food, to depend on others, and to keep waiting for charity. But now Captain Ibrahim Traoré wants to flip that script. He says, rice is not just food, it's sovereignty. So here's the question. Is this a revolution or just another loud promise from a young soldier in fatigues? Because in Washington and Brussels, food security is boring, stable, invisible. In Ouagadougou, it's a parade. Now, before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Share your own food habits, your daily rice story, or even what you think really defines independence. This channel isn't just about the news. It's about the connecting voices across America, Africa, and beyond. Welcome to our space. If you want the stories big media won't break down, hit subscribe, stay close, and join the conversation. So let's step in, not with cliches, not with applause lines, but with the facts and the fire behind Burkina Faso's rice gamble. And from here, we move straight into the heart of the story. Burkina Faso claims it has built a factory that can process 400 tons of rice per day. And for a country long trapped in food imports, that number sounds almost unbelievable. For decades, billions left Africa to buy rice abroad. Today, officials in Ouagadougou say the tide is turning. The news is straightforward. On August 18th, government ministers toured the new plant in Kadogo, praising it as a cornerstone of sovereignty. Cameras rolled, speeches promised dignity, and for the first time in years, a landlocked nation with constant crises tried to show the world something other than instability. But here's the catch. If one plan changes the narrative, what does that say about how fragile the system really is? Farmers in Burkina Faso used to sell unprocessed rice that often spoiled before reaching markets. Now the promise is different. Machines will polish, package, and distribute grain at industrial scale. To some, that feels like a miracle. To others, it's just catching up to what most American families take for granted when they walk into a supermarket. According to surveys, over 90% of US households never worry about rice running out on the shelves. In Burkina Faso, people remember seasons when entire villages relied on imports just to survive. And maybe that's where the emotional weight sits. A mother who once rationed imported bags might now imagine her children eating rice grown and processed in her own region. But the question lingers. Can one shining factory really guarantee stability? Or is it only a spotlight hiding the deeper shadows? For viewers, it's worth pausing here. Imagine if your own daily food choice suddenly depended on whether a single plant worked or not. Would you feel secure, or would you worry the first breakdown could pull the rug out from under you? That tension between hope and fragility is what makes the Kadogo project so symbolic. It isn't just about machinery or a policy. It's about people asking if they can finally trust their own land to feed them. And that mood, cautious but rising, leads directly into the broader stakes this story carries. Burkina Faso calls it an offensive, but the word feels strange. Offensive usually means war, not farming. Yet here, tractors and plows are being deployed like weapons. The government's agro-pastoral and fisheries plan from 2023 to 2025 is supposed to turn idle land into production zones and displace youth into workers. Officials say it's about sovereignty. Critics say it's about survival dressed as strategy. The facts are clear. Hundreds of tractors purchased, vast plains open, and programs launched to mobilize thousands of young people. But here's the paradox. This is happening in a country where insecurity still pushes families off their farms. How do you grow more food while parts of your land remain dangerous? The ambition is massive, but the contradiction is sharp. Still, symbols matter. For young men once drifting in the streets of Ouagadougou, or women who had no steady market for their crops, being told they are part of a national mission changes something. According to studies on human behavior, people often perform better when they feel their work serves a higher cause. And maybe that's why farmers here speak of pride, not just income, when asked about planting more rice. But think about it. If you were asked to join such a campaign, would you see opportunity or would you fear being used as another statistic in a political speech? For many Americans, job programs are ordinary, predictable. In Burkina Faso, they can feel like the difference between being forgotten and being counted. That gap in expectations is the hidden weight behind every tractor on the field. And beneath the optimism, there's a quiet twist. Mobilizing people doesn't guarantee production, it only guarantees effort. The real question is whether effort can survive the storms, drought, insurgency, or broken promises. That fragile balance between enthusiasm and reality is what shapes the mood on the ground. From here, the focus shifts from government campaigns to individual choices, where one entrepreneur decides to push the story even further. And that personal move adds a new layer to this narrative. It's unusual when the face of heavy industry in Africa isn't a general or a minister, but a woman. And in Burkina Faso, that face is Mamounata Baza. She is the billionaire entrepreneur behind the Kadogo plant, and her decision to pour private money into rice processing shocked even seasoned observers. For a country where private capital often hides in real estate or banks, choosing agriculture looks almost counterintuitive. The record is clear. Baza's plant has capacity for 400 tons a day, equipped with modern milling and packaging machines that meet export standards. She insists this is not charity, but business with a purpose, building value at home instead of shipping raw crops abroad. And yet there's a deeper irony. In places like the US, corporations run global food empires quietly. In Burkina Faso, one woman's project is hailed as a national turning point. That contrast matters. For Americans, it's normal to see women lead Fortune 500 companies. Here, the image of a woman standing beside giant silos is powerful, almost symbolic of a shift. According to studies, when representation breaks old molds, it often accelerates change in ways that statistics alone cannot explain. So for farmers in Kadogo, seeing Baza walk the site may inspire more than government speeches ever could. But here comes the twist. A factory can be built in steel, but trust is built in time. Will workers believe this opportunity will last or fear it might collapse with the next political storm? If you were in their place, would you bet your family's future on a single plant? That uncertainty is as real as the shiny machines inside the warehouse. Still, the very act of a private figure stepping into a space long abandoned by investors carries weight. It challenges the assumption that only the state can drive progress, and it forces leaders to consider a new balance between public authority and private ambition. That tension between government control and individual initiative sets the stage for the next chapter of this story, where politics and power start to mix even more directly. It's strange when a minister's visit becomes bigger news than the factory itself. Yet in Burkina Faso, the arrival of Agriculture Minister Ismael Sombi at Kadogo turned the construction site into a national stage. Officials framed it as proof the state isn't just talking, it's standing side by side with private enterprise. But here's the tension. When political backing becomes the headline, does it strengthen the project or make it more vulnerable to power shifts? The facts are simple. On August 18th, Sombi walked the grounds, praised Mamounata Baza, and declared the planned part of the government's long-term sovereignty plan. Crowds saw cameras rolling, speeches made, and handshakes exchanged. For a nation often accused of weak institutions, this image of state and private sector in rhythm mattered. Yet beneath that harmony lies the question of permanence. Governments change, factories remain. Which one can people actually trust? For workers on the ground, the difference is personal. A farmer remembers years when leaders promised reform that never reached his field. Now, seeing the minister in his village feels like recognition at last. And according to studies on public trust, people often attach more value to leaders who show up physically than to those who make distant policy. Still, the twist is obvious. Visibility does not guarantee delivery. Americans often expect government presence as routine. In Burkina Faso, it can feel extraordinary. That gap in expectation changes how symbolic a single visit can be. Imagine if you were in that crowd. Would the minister's words reassure you that this factory is safe? Or would you wonder if it's another project tied too closely to one administration's survival? Còn người nếu có thể tin rằng quyền lực và sản xuất đi cùng nhau, họ sẽ làm việc với lòng tin. Nếu không, họ sẽ cho xem cơn gió chính trị đối chiếu thế nào. And that uncertainty is the real story beneath the speeches. The government's embrace makes the plan look larger than life, but it also ties its fate to politics that can shift overnight. That fragile balance between symbolic support and practical risk is exactly what shapes the next turn in this unfolding narrative, where promises collide with economic reality. The numbers sound bold. One factory processing 400 tons a day is expected to ripple through thousands of lives. But the bigger question is whether the chain reaction actually delivers stability or just short-lived buzz. Officials project hundreds of direct jobs and thousands of indirect ones. Farmers selling harvests, truck drivers hauling grain, retailers pushing packaged rice. On paper, the economy looks like it finally has a rhythm. Yet history shows rhythms can be broken. For many in Burkina Faso, the contrast is striking. A decade ago, rice often spoiled in warehouses with no buyers. Today, farmers talk about guaranteed markets. That before and after shift creates hope, but also a hidden pressure. If the factory ever slows, families who built their budgets around it could be left exposed. Americans rarely think about whether food processors will shut down. But in fragile economies, one breakdown can feel like a national setback. And here's the subtle twist. More production doesn't automatically mean more prosperity. If land is overused or water stretched thin, the same engine that drives jobs could also spark disputes over resources. Con người nếu có thể tin rằng mọi nỗ lực hôm nay sẽ nuôi dưỡng ngày mai, họ sẵn sàng chịu rủi ro. Nhưng nếu ngược lại, sự nghi ngờ lấn nhanh hơn cả niềm tin. Picture a young truck driver landing his first steady route, suddenly able to support his family. Then imagine him hearing rumors that insurgents are threatening transport corridors. That fragile confidence can turn overnight into fear. According to behavioral studies, most people adjust their habits, not after success, but after shocks. One disruption is often enough to reshape how they trust the system. So yes, the Kadogo plant is feeding more than stomachs. It's feeding expectations. And expectations, once raised, are hard to control. That tension between promise and pressure naturally pulls us to a deeper layer of the story, where food production meets the larger idea of sovereignty itself. Sovereignty is a big word for something as small as a grain of rice. Yet in Burkina Faso, leaders insist this factory is proof the nation can finally feed itself without bowing to imports. On record, President Ibrahim Traoré frames it as more than agriculture. It's a political weapon. His message is clear. Producing rice locally equals independence. But here's the paradox. True independence cannot be packaged in a single product. It requires systems strong enough to survive beyond one project, one leader, or one speech. The narrative sounds powerful. Billions once left Africa every year to buy foreign rice. Now that money could circulate at home. Farmers become suppliers, youth become workers, families become consumers of their own land's harvest. It feels like a victory lap. And yet, history offers a quiet reminder. Many revolutions began with high hopes, only to falter when early wins created expectations too heavy to carry. For ordinary people, the difference is immediate. A father who once lined up for imported bags may now watch his children eat rice grown nearby. That shift from dependence to dignity carries real emotional weight. And according to social research, most people anchor their sense of freedom not in abstract rights, but in daily routines, whether the store shelf is stocked, whether the meal feels secure. That's why Americans rarely talk about food sovereignty. They live inside it every day. But here's the twist inside the twist. If sovereignty is tied to rice today, what happens tomorrow when the challenge shifts to oil or electricity or education? Can the same energy sustain? Con người nếu có thể tin rằng một bước nhỏ mở đường cho bước lớn hơn, họ sẽ bám vào hy vọng. Nhưng nếu cảm thấy đó chỉ là một cái ngọn lửa chóng tàn, niềm tin sẽ biến thành hoài nghi. So the Rice Factory stands as both achievement and question mark. It shines like a symbol of strength, but it also whispers about fragility, because symbols can inspire and they can also deceive. That duality leaves us with a closing mood, a mix of pride and caution, guiding us naturally into the bigger frame of what this all really means for Burkina Faso's place in the world. Burkina Faso is celebrating a rice plant as if it were a revolution. And that in itself is unusual because revolutions are rarely built on machinery, but on whether trust lasts after the cameras leave. The government calls it sovereignty, investors call it vision, and ordinary families call it food on the table. Each label is true, but each one hides a cost. For every ton processed, there's the promise of stability, but for every promise, there's the risk of disappointment. That dual edge is what makes this story so fragile. In the past, leaders raised hopes that later collapsed, leaving people more cautious than inspired. Today, the scene looks different. Silos rising, jobs opening, ministers showing up. But the question remains whether this moment will stretch into a system or fade as another symbol. For a farmer, the shift is personal. Yesterday, he depended on imports. Today, he sells to a national factory. For his children, it may feel like a doorway to dignity. But what if that doorway swings shut? Còn người nếu có thể tin rằng bữa cơm ngày mai chắc chắn họ sẽ dốc sức làm việc. Nếu ngược lại, họ sẽ retreat vào nỗi sổ thiếu thốn. And isn't that the same instinct most Americans feel when shelves suddenly empty? Even for a day, stability becomes visible only when it's threatened. Burkina Faso now stands at a fork. Build a chain of factories and deepen sovereignty, or lean on one project and risk everything on its success. The choice between multiplying gains or magnifying vulnerability is what will decide how history remembers this moment. And as the dust settles around Kadogo, the factory stands not only as steel and concrete, but as a mirror. It reflects both ambition and fragility, pride and caution. That reflection will continue shaping the mood long after the speeches fade,